7 men signed on to dig coal from a remote mountain ridge outside Winnemucca, chasing the Western Coal and Lumber Company's promise of 4-month wages. The work was brutal but honest. Black dust, frozen mornings, and the kind of silence that makes men speak in half-sentences. Then Jack Hollister's pick punched through solid rock into empty space that shouldn't have existed. The air that rushed out carried a smell like copper and sun-warmed scales, and when we lowered our lamps into that darkness, the light caught on carved stone pillars covered in symbols no man had ever catalogued. That first night, something began moving in the tunnels beneath our camp. Not the settling of rock or the shift of frozen ground. This was rhythmic, deliberate, the sound of intelligence measuring the distance between us and them. By the second day, we found boot prints that ended where 3-toed tracks began, pressed deep into stone dust as if the rock itself was soft as clay. The Paiute who cooked our meals had a name for that mountain. They called it the Scaled Back, and wouldn't approach after dark. We should have listened. Whatever claimed those tunnels first was patient, territorial, and had been waiting in the deep dark for something foolish enough to break the seal. Kindly subscribe to the channel as we move on. Thank you for being here. Jack insisted we go down that same afternoon, before the cold could settle into our bones and turn caution into cowardice. We rigged ropes using the same hemp that had lowered equipment into copper shafts back in Utah, and I remember thinking the knots looked too simple for what we were attempting. The breach was narrow, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through sideways, and the descent went straight down for 30 feet before opening into space that swallowed our lamplight hole. I went second, after Jack, and the rope burned through my gloves despite the November chill. When my boots finally touched stone, the floor felt wrong beneath me. Too smooth, too level, like it had been worked by hands that understood geometry. The chamber stretched in all directions beyond what our lamps could reach, but I could make out the pillars. 7 of them, each as thick as a ponderosa pine, rising from floor to ceiling in perfect alignment. The carvings covered every inch, serpentine patterns that twisted and doubled back on themselves, symbols that looked almost like writing but hurt to follow too long with your eyes. Grey Hawk came down last, and I watched his face change when the light caught the nearest pillar. He pressed his hand against the stone, then pulled back quick, like he'd touched a stove plate. "This is not Paiute," he said, and his voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. "This is older, much older." The ritual circles were carved directly into the floor, 3 of them concentric, with channels cut between them in a pattern that suggested flow. At the center of the largest circle sat a fire pit, blackened but not by wood ash. The residue was oily, dark green, and when Samuel Carr scraped at it with his knife, it came away in flakes that caught the lamplight like mica. But it was the skin that stopped us cold. It lay coiled near the western wall, translucent in places, thick as canvas in others, easily 12 feet from end to end. The pattern was unmistakable, scales arranged in diamond shapes, each one the size of a silver dollar. Thomas Ward, who'd worked cattle ranches before the mines, picked it up between 2 fingers like he was handling a dead snake. "This was shed recent," he said. "Maybe days. Whatever war this is still growing." Samuel volunteered to map the deeper passages before any of us could think better of it. He was the youngest at 22, eager to prove himself worthy of full shares. He took 2 lamps, a ball of twine, and Jack's pistol that we all knew wouldn't fire straight in damp air. We watched his light bob and weave through an archway at the chamber's far end, then disappear around a curve that descended at an angle our ropes couldn't follow. That was 3 hours before sunset. By the time true dark came, Samuel Carr still hadn't returned, and from somewhere deep in those passages, we heard the first tapping begin. The tapping started at midnight, methodical as a telegraph operator working a line. 3 sharp strikes against stone, a pause long enough to count to 5, then 2 more strikes. It came from directly beneath the bunkhouse floor, and the sound traveled through the wooden planks into our cots until we could feel it in our spines. Jack sat up first, then the rest of us, and we stood there in our long underwear staring at the floorboards like they might suddenly split open. "Samuel," Thomas Ward whispered, but Greyhawk shook his head slow and certain. The pattern repeated for an hour, then stopped so abruptly the silence felt heavier than the sound had been. None of us slept the rest of that night. We went back down at first light, all 6 of us this time, leaving no one alone in camp. The chamber looked different in morning. The lamplight seemed weaker somehow, like the darkness was pushing back harder. Samuel's twine trail led us through the archway and down a passage that narrowed until we had to move single file, our shoulders scraping rock that felt slick despite the dry air. The lamp sat at the bottom of a natural decline, still burning though the oil should have been exhausted hours ago. It illuminated the entrance to what could only be called a lower chamber. The ceiling dropped away into a space our lights couldn't measure. But Samuel wasn't there. His coat lay folded neat as Sunday church clothes beside the lamp, and his canteen sat upright, still half full. It was the tracks that made my hands start shaking. Samuel's boot prints were clear in the stone dust, deep impressions from a man moving with purpose, heading toward the lower chamber's mouth. Then, 20 feet from the entrance, they simply ended. Not like he'd turned back or jumped. They just stopped mid-stride, the left boot print complete, the right one only showing the heel. Where his tracks ended, others began. 3-toed impressions pressed into the dust so deep they'd cracked the underlying stone. Each toe showed a curved talon mark at its tip, and the prints were spaced wide. Whatever made them moved on legs longer than any man's. There were 4 sets of tracks, all converging on Samuel's last position, and from there they led into the lower chamber in a pattern that looked almost ceremonial, like pallbearers carrying something precious. Jack knelt beside the tracks and held his hand over one for scale. The print was nearly as long as his forearm. "These are fresh," he said, his voice gone flat. "Made since we were last here." Greyhawk backed toward the passage entrance, his lamp held high. "They were watching us," he said. "When we came down yesterday, they were here, in the dark beyond our light, and they waited until we left him alone." The tapping started again then, echoing up from the lower chamber. 3 strikes, pause, 2 strikes. But this time it came from multiple directions at once, surrounding us in the dark, and I realized with a cold certainty that it wasn't communication. It was measurement. They were counting us, cataloging what had invaded their territory, and deciding what to do about it. We ran. Kindly subscribe to the channel as we move on. Thank you for being here. Greyhawk found the stones at dawn while checking the mule line. He didn't call out, just stood at the camp's eastern edge staring at the ground until Jack and I walked over to see what had frozen him in place. The circle was perfect. 37 white stones, each the size of a man's fist, arranged in a ring that encompassed our entire camp. Tents, cook fire, tool shed, bunkhouse, all of it contained within that boundary like livestock in a pen. I touched the nearest stone and jerked my hand back. Despite the night frost still clinging to the sagebrush, the rock was warm as fresh-baked bread. Jack moved around the circle, testing each stone in turn, and every one held that same inexplicable heat. "They did this while we slept," he said, and I could hear his voice trying to stay level. "Walked right through camp, and we never heard them." Thomas Ward wanted to scatter the stones immediately, break whatever claim they represented. But Greyhawk stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. "You don't disturb a boundary marker," he said. Not unless you want what's on the other side to cross over. We spent that day preparing to leave. Jack sent James Wheaton down to check the equipment in the tool shed while the rest of us packed provisions and readied the mules. The plan was simple: abandon the site, ride for Winnemucca, report the loss of Samuel Carr to the authorities. Let someone else decide what to do about ancient tunnels and impossible tracks. We'd done our part and more, but the sun set faster than it should have, or maybe we'd just lost track of time in our hurry to be gone. Twilight came on purple and cold, and that's when the shadows started moving between the tents. At first I thought it was the mules shifting in their traces, throwing strange shapes against the canvas in the firelight. Then one of the shadows moved independent of the flames, gliding from the bunkhouse to the cook tent in a path that bent wrong, too angular, like watching something that had learned to walk upright but hadn't quite mastered the rhythm. The shape stood easily 7 feet tall, and when it paused at the tent's edge, I saw the outline of a head that was too long, too narrow, sloping back in a way that had nothing to do with human skull structure. James came running from the tool shed, pistol drawn, and fired twice at a shadow moving near the equipment cache. The reports cracked sharp in the thin mountain air, and for one held breath, everything went silent. Then the mountain answered. It started as a hiss, low and sustained, coming from the sealed mine entrance. Then another joined it from the ridge above camp, and another from the creek bed below. Within seconds, the entire mountainside was alive with that sound, a chorus of hissing that rose and fell in waves, punctuated by clicking that came so fast it sounded almost like rattlesnake warnings. The shadows stopped moving, standing perfectly still around the camp's perimeter, just outside that circle of white stones. They were showing us the boundary, and they were showing us how badly we were outnumbered. Kindly subscribe to the channel as we move on. Thank you for being here. They came at dusk the next day, stepping into the firelight like they'd been waiting for an invitation. 3 of them, moving in formation with the kind of precision that only comes from intelligence and practice. The largest led, flanked by 2 others slightly smaller but no less terrifying in the dancing orange glow. 8 feet tall, bipedal, covered in scales that caught the light like wet river stones, pale green with patterns like diamondbacks running down their spines. Their heads were elongated, sloping back into crests that had ridges like ancient armor, and their eyes reflected red in the flames, tracking each of us with a focus that felt surgical. They didn't charge. That's what broke us faster than violence would have. They moved with purpose, cutting angles, positioning themselves to divide our group. The largest one moved toward the mule line, and the animals screamed in a way I'd never heard before, pure animal recognition of a predator that had hunted their ancestors. Thomas Ward ran for the tool shed where we'd stored the rifles, and one of the smaller beings simply stepped into his path. Thomas tried to dodge around it, and the creature's arms shot out faster than a man could follow, those curved black claws catching him across the shoulder and spinning him like a child's toy. James made it to the lamp cache near the bunkhouse, but before he could grab one, the creature nearest him opened its mouth and expelled a sharp breath that extinguished every lamp within 10 feet. Just a controlled exhale, and the light died like it had never been. James stumbled backward into the darkness, and I heard him cry out once before the sound cut off with terrible abruptness. Jack had the presence of mind to grab a burning branch from the cook fire and thrust it toward the largest being. The creature regarded him with what I can only describe as curiosity, then moved. It covered the distance between them in 3 impossibly quick strides, and when Jack swung the branch, it simply leaned back at an angle that would have broken a human spine. Then it struck, those claws raking across Jack's chest in a motion so fast I barely saw it happen. Jack went down hard, clutching at wounds that burned. I could see the flesh around the cuts already darkening, turning the color of spoiled meat. Grey Hawk was shouting something in Paiute, backing toward the mine entrance where we'd stored the blasting powder. I followed him because there was nowhere else to go. Thomas was down, James was gone, and the creatures were herding the rest of us like wolves working a deer herd. We had maybe 2 minutes before they decided to finish it. The black powder charges were still rigged from our original plan to expand the tunnel. Grey Hawk didn't hesitate. He struck a match and touched it to the fuse, then grabbed my arm and ran. Behind us, the three beings tilted their heads in unison, watching the spark race toward the tunnel mouth. If they understood what was coming, they didn't show it. The explosion tore through the mountain like thunder trapped in stone, collapsing the entrance and sending a wall of dust and debris rolling through the camp. When the air cleared enough to see, the beings were gone, and so was Thomas Ward. We had seconds to decide, stay and die, or run and maybe live. Kindly subscribe to the channel as we move on. Thank you for being here. We carried Jack between us for the first 6 miles, Grey Hawk and I taking turns with the weight while the cold bit through our coats. His chest wounds had stopped bleeding, but the flesh around them had turned black as tar, spreading in web-like patterns across his ribs. He talked in fragments, fever words about the creatures having names for us, about the chamber we'd found being merely an antechamber to something vaster. They were here first, he kept saying. The mountain remembers. The mountain always remembers. By dawn of the second day, we had to stop. Jack's breathing had gone shallow, and his skin felt cold despite the fever burning behind his eyes. Grey Hawk built a small fire while I tried to get water past Jack's lips, but he was beyond drinking. He died just after sunrise, his last words barely a whisper. They are not monsters. We're the invasion. His body seized once, then went still, and I closed his eyes with fingers that shook from more than just the cold. We reached Winnemucca on the 3rd day, 2 men out of 7, and told our story to a company supervisor who listened with the expression of someone calculating losses. He sent a recovery team up the mountain a week later, 8 men with rifles and dynamite, tasked with retrieving bodies and salvaging equipment. They found nothing. The camp was empty, swept clean as if we'd never been there. The bunkhouse stood intact, but the bunks held no blankets, no personal effects, no signs of habitation. The tool shed was bare. The fire pit showed no ash. Even the white stones were gone, leaving only slight depressions in the frost where they'd Saturday. And the mine entrance we'd collapsed with black powder stood open, the rubble cleared away and stacked in neat piles on either side, like someone had simply unlocked a door. The recovery team found no bodies, no blood, no 3-toed tracks in the dust. Their report concluded that the crew had abandoned the site due to dangerous conditions and that the survivors had fabricated a story to excuse the loss of company property. I was fined 2 months' wages. Grey Hawk returned to his people and never spoke of it again. 20 years passed before I went back. I'm an old man now, with no family to worry over my decisions, and I needed to know if memory could be trusted or if the mountain had driven us mad with bad air and isolation. I hiked up alone with a good lamp and a surveyor's map, and I found the campsite grown over with sage and mountain grass. The mine entrance was there, partially collapsed now from weather and time, and I stood at its mouth for a long while before I noticed the markings. They were carved into the rock face beside the entrance, the same serpentine symbols we'd seen on the pillars, but these were weathered by centuries of exposure. I followed them along the ridge and found more, leading down to a creek bed where the stone had been walked smooth by hands that predated any known Nevada civilization. I understood then what Jack had tried to tell me in his delirium. The beings hadn't invaded the mountain. They'd built it, or at least carved its heart into something sacred, something that belonged to them long before coal companies drew their claims, and men like me brought picks to break open the earth. The mountain keeps its secrets well. The reptilians never left. They simply retreated deeper, beyond the reach of our lights and our greed, waiting in chambers that descend farther than any man will ever map. And the mountain remembers. It remembers every intrusion, every violation of its sealed darkness, and it's patient enough to wait for the next time we dig too deep and break through into spaces where we were never meant to go. I left a stone at the entrance before I hiked back down, not as a marker, but as an apology. Thank you for watching. Kindly subscribe for more real-life contents.